Okay, so you want to own a vineyard. You picture rows of vines in the afternoon sun, a stone farmhouse, a glass of something you made yourself, and a business that quietly prints money while you walk the rows in a linen shirt. Here's the problem. If you plant vines this year, you will not sell a single serious bottle for about 5 years. You will not turn a profit for closer to 10, and the wine itself might never be where the money is. Owning a vineyard is one of the only businesses on earth where losing money for a decade isn't a failure. It's the plan. And once you understand what you're actually buying with all those losses, the whole thing makes a strange kind of sense. Let's begin with the part that stops most people before they start, which is the land. And here you run into a number so strange it barely looks real. In the most famous wine regions on earth, a single acre of planted vineyard can cost more than a large house. In the very best appellations, the price per acre can climb into the millions. Drive an hour away, into a region nobody has heard of, and you can buy land that grows the same grape variety in a similar climate under the same sun for a small fraction of that. Sometimes 1% of it. Stop and think about what that means. The dirt is not 100 times better. The sunlight is not 100 times stronger. The grapes are not 100 times sweeter. And yet the price gap is enormous, permanent, and completely accepted by everyone in the industry. So the very first question you have to answer as a buyer isn't about wine at all. It's this: what exactly is that extra money buying? Hold that question. It's the whole episode, and we'll come back to it with an answer that changes how you see every bottle you've ever bought. For now, let's just get you planted. Say you've bought your land. You are still nowhere near making wine. You now have to actually establish a vineyard, and this is a construction project disguised as farming. The ground has to be cleared, graded, and often deep-ripped to break up compacted soil so roots can go down. You need a water system, which usually means drilling a well and laying irrigation lines down every single row. You have to install a trellis system, which is thousands of posts and miles of wire that the vines will eventually be trained onto. You need fencing, because deer and other animals will happily eat a young vineyard to the ground. And then you buy the vines themselves, tens of thousands of individual plants, usually grafted onto specific rootstock chosen for your soil and your pests. Depending on the region and the terrain, establishing a vineyard can cost tens of thousands of dollars per acre before a single grape exists. Multiply that across a meaningful property, and you are spending a serious amount of money to plant something that will not pay you back for years. And notice what you still don't have. You have a farm. You do not have a winery. Growing grapes and making wine are two completely different businesses, and most people who dream about the second one forget they have to pay for the first one first. If you actually want to turn your own fruit into your own bottles under your own name, you need a production facility, and that is a small factory. Presses, tanks, usually stainless steel, in multiple sizes. A cooling system, because fermentation generates heat, and uncontrolled heat ruins wine. A barrel program, and good oak barrels cost around $1,000 each and get replaced on a rotation, so a serious cellar is a permanent, recurring expense measured in the hundreds of thousands. A bottling line, or the cost of renting a mobile one. A laboratory, or at least the testing to keep the wine from going wrong. And a building to hold all of it at a stable temperature. So the honest picture is that you're funding 3 businesses at once. A farm, a factory, and eventually a retail and hospitality operation. Each one has its own equipment, its own staff, its own failure modes. And exactly one of them, the last one, is the part you were fantasizing about when you pictured the linen shirt. Which brings us to the strangest cost in this entire business: time. Here's the biological reality you cannot argue with, no matter how much money you have. A newly planted grapevine gives you nothing in year 1. In year 2, it's still building its structure, and anything it produces gets removed. So the plant puts its energy into roots and wood instead of fruit. Around year 3, you might get a small crop, and it's usually not good enough for a wine you'd want your name on. Realistically, you're looking at year 4 or 5 before the fruit is worth making into a serious bottle. And then the wine itself needs time. A white might be in the bottle within a year. A serious red will often spend a year or more in barrel and then more time resting in the bottle before it's ready to sell. So stack those two weights on top of each other, the vine's weight and the wine's weight, and you arrive at the number that scares people. From the day you plant, it can be 5 or 6 years before you have a bottle worth real money to sell, and closer to a decade before the whole operation stops losing money on the year. Now sit with what that actually means financially. For those years, you are paying to prune, to spray, to irrigate, to harvest, to employ people, to maintain equipment, to insure the property, and to pay taxes on land you bought at an enormous price every year. And your revenue from wine, for much of that stretch, is zero. This isn't a startup that's burning cash because it's badly run. This is a business where burning cash for years is the normal, expected, unavoidable structure of the thing. Every vineyard owner on earth has walked through this valley. You cannot buy your way out of it, because you cannot make a vine grow faster with money. By the way, this is exactly why so many vineyards are owned by people who made their fortunes somewhere else. Tech, finance, real estate, entertainment. It isn't just vanity, though there's plenty of that. It's that the cost structure of a vineyard almost demands an owner who doesn't need it to pay the bills for the first decade. A person who needs income next year cannot plant a vineyard. A person who has other income can. That single fact quietly shapes who owns the wine industry, and it explains why. So many labels you admire are quietly funded by a business that has nothing to do with wine at all. All right, let's say you survived the wait. The vines are mature, the wine is good, and bottles are finally leaving the property. How does the money actually come in? Because the answer is far more layered than "we sell wine," and each layer teaches you something about what this business really is. The first layer is the obvious one, selling bottles. But immediately there's a fork in the road that matters more than almost anything else you'll decide. And it's the difference between selling wholesale and selling direct. If you sell wholesale, you sell your wine to a distributor who sells it to a shop or a restaurant, who sells it to the person drinking it. Every one of those hands takes a cut. By the time a bottle reaches a customer, the winery may be keeping only a fraction of that final price. Wholesale gets you volume, and it gets your bottle onto shelves in places you'll never visit. But the margin is thin, and you have very little control over how your wine is presented or priced once it leaves your hands. And in some places, that chain isn't just a habit. It's the law. In parts of the world, a winery is legally forbidden from selling straight to a shop or a restaurant. It must go through a licensed middleman by statute, which means the distributor isn't a service you chose. It's a toll booth you're required to drive through. And because a large distributor might carry thousands of different wines, yours is one line in an enormous catalog, sold by a salesperson who has never walked your rows and has no particular reason to fight for you. You can spend a decade making something extraordinary and end up as a forgettable entry on someone else's price list. Now compare that to direct to consumer. Someone drives up to your property, tastes your wine in your tasting room, falls in love with it, and buys 3 bottles from you at the full retail price. You keep essentially all of it. No distributor, no retailer, no middleman. That same bottle just earned you several times what the wholesale version would have, which reveals the first real gear of the machine. In wine, who you sell to matters as much as what you sell. The exact same liquid, in the exact same bottle, can be a thin margin commodity or a high margin luxury good, depending entirely on how it reaches the person drinking it. And this is why so much of what looks like romance at a winery is actually margin engineering. The pretty tasting room, the tour, the dog that greets you in the parking lot, the winemaker who wanders out to say hello, none of that is decoration. Every one of those things exists to move a bottle out of the low margin channel and into the high margin one by turning an anonymous shopper into a person with a memory attached to your label, which leads directly to the second layer. And it's the one that quietly saves most small wineries. The wine club. A wine club is a subscription. Customers sign up to receive a set number of bottles several times a year, automatically charged to their card. And it is a beautiful piece of business machinery for a few reasons at once. It's recurring, so you can forecast revenue instead of guessing. It's direct, so you keep the full margin. It clears inventory you'd otherwise have to sell to a distributor at a discount. And it locks in customers emotionally, because they stop being buyers and start being members. Well-run small wineries can end up with a very large share of their total income coming from club members, and it's the reason many of them survive at all. The club turns an unpredictable agricultural business into something that looks a little bit like a subscription company. The third layer is the one shoppers rarely think of as a business, and that's the tasting room and everything around it. The tasting fees themselves, the merchandise, the tours. But the tasting room's real job isn't the money it takes at the counter. Its real job is conversion. Someone who tastes your wine on your land, with the vines in view, is dramatically more likely to buy bottles at full price, and to join your club and to keep buying for years afterward. So, the tasting room is best understood not as a revenue line, but as a customer acquisition machine. And the wine you pour for free is the marketing budget. You are not giving away product. You are paying, in liquid, for a long-term relationship. And then there's a fourth category, the one that surprises people the most when they learn how much of it there is. Everything that has nothing to do with drinking wine at all. Events. Weddings, especially. A vineyard is one of the most photogenic places a person can get married, and couples will pay enormous sums to hold a wedding among the vines. Corporate retreats, concerts, private dinners. Some vineyards have hospitality operations, restaurants, or even lodging on site, and for a certain kind of property, the hotel. And restaurant and event business can rival or exceed what the wine itself brings in. Then there are the quieter streams. Selling excess grapes to other wineries who need fruit. Custom crush, where you rent out your winemaking equipment and expertise to smaller producers who can't afford their own, licensing your name for products you didn't make. Notice what just happened as we stacked those layers. Bottle sales, the club, the tasting room, the events. Only one of those is actually about selling wine, and it's often not even the most profitable one. The rest are about people paying to be near your vineyard, to belong to it, to be photographed in it, to feel something about it, which should make you suspicious about what the product here really is. And there's one more lever, and it's the one that makes wine different from almost any other farm product. Price is not set by cost. It's set by belief. Two bottles can hold liquid of similar quality, cost a similar amount to produce, and sell for wildly different prices. Because one of them has a story and a score and a reputation behind it, and the other doesn't. A high rating from an influential critic can move a wine's price and clear its inventory almost overnight. A reputation built over decades lets a producer raise prices year after year, while people wait in line to be allowed to buy. That means a serious part of your job as an owner is not agricultural at all. It's the slow, patient construction of a reason for someone to pay more for your bottle than for the nearly identical one beside it. In most farming, you're a price taker. You grow the thing and accept whatever the market pays. In wine, if you build the name well enough, you become a price setter. That transition from taker to setter is where nearly all the profit in this industry lives. But before we get to what that really means, we have to talk about the trapdoor. Because everything I've described sounds like a slow but reliable machine, and it isn't. It's a machine with a very specific and very brutal weakness. Here's the structure of the problem. Your costs are almost entirely fixed. The pruning has to happen. The land taxes are due. The staff need paying. The loan on the property doesn't care about anything. But your output, the thing all those fixed costs exist to produce, is decided by the weather, and the weather does not negotiate. A late frost in spring can kill the young buds just as they emerge and take a huge portion of your crop before summer even starts. Hail can shred a vineyard in minutes. Drought can shrink your yield. Too much rain at the wrong moment can dilute the fruit or invite rot. Extreme heat can shut the vines down. And in some regions there is now a newer nightmare, where wildfire smoke drifts across the vineyard. And the grapes absorb compounds that make the resulting wine taste like an ashtray. Fruit that looks perfectly healthy on the vine can be commercially worthless once it's fermented. Any one of these can take a single year's crop from you almost entirely. And here's the cruel part. You still pay all the costs. You farmed the whole season. You paid the whole team. You maintained the whole property. And at the end of it, you have a fraction of your normal fruit. Or none. Or fruit you can't sell. And a lost harvest is the mild version. The severe version is losing the vines themselves. A hard enough freeze, a serious disease, or a pest that gets into the roots can force you to tear out a block and start over. which means you don't just lose 1 year. You reset the clock. You go back to planting, back to waiting 3 years for fruit, and 5 for a bottle. On land, you are still paying taxes and labor and debt on the entire time. In most businesses, a bad year is a bad year. Here, a bad enough year can cost you half a decade. Now remember the timeline problem, and watch how the two combine, because the wine you would have sold from this year's harvest wasn't going to be sold this year anyway. It was going to be sold 2 or 3 years from now. So a disaster today doesn't just cost you today's income. It punches a hole in your revenue years into the future, at a moment when everything will look fine on the property. The vines will be green, the tasting room will be busy, and the bottles that should have been on the shelf simply won't exist because a frost you barely remember quietly deleted them years earlier. That's the trapdoor. The damage and the pain are separated by years, which makes this business almost uniquely difficult to manage, and almost impossible to feel your way through by instinct. So how does anyone survive this? And now we finally get to the answer, and to the question I asked you to hold at the very beginning. Why does 1 acre cost 100 times more than a nearly identical acre down the road? Here it is. You are not really buying farmland. You are buying a name and the right to put that name on a bottle. In the wine world, regions are legally defined. There are official boundaries drawn on maps, and if your grapes are grown inside a particular boundary, you are permitted to print that region's name on your label. If your vineyard sits 1 road outside that boundary, you are not, even if the soil is identical. Even if you can see the neighboring vineyard from your porch, that name on the label is not decoration. It is a legal permission that changes what customers will pay, sometimes by a factor of 10 or more, for wine that a blind taster might not be able to tell apart. And that permission is attached to the land permanently. It cannot be manufactured, expanded, or moved. The amount of land inside the famous boundaries is fixed forever. No one can vote more of it into existence, and no amount of money can conjure another acre of it. Demand for those names grows as the world gets wealthier and more people learn to want them. Supply cannot grow at all. So the price of that dirt does what the price of anything fixed and desired always does. It climbs, decade after decade, which means the actual asset you bought was never the vines, and it certainly wasn't the wine. It was a permanent, non-reproducible license to be scarce. The vines are how you exercise that license. The wine is how you advertise it. And now the losses make sense. Because while you were losing money on the wine for 10 years, the land underneath the wine was very likely appreciating. Owners in these regions have watched the value of their acreage climb enormously over the decades, entirely independent of whether the winery had a good year. So you can lose money on operations year after year and still be building serious wealth. Because the balance sheet is doing the work, the income statement isn't. The wine business is the visible part. The land is the actual position, and the brand does something similar. Every year you make good wine, win a score from a critic, get poured at a good restaurant, host a wedding, and turn a visitor into a club member, you are making the name on your label a little more valuable. And a more valuable name lets you charge more for the same liquid, and it makes the land itself more valuable to whoever buys it from you eventually. You are not just farming grapes. You are farming reputation and reputation compounds. So the money in a vineyard doesn't primarily come out of the bottle. It comes out of 2 things. The bottle is quietly building, scarcity you can never make more of, and a story people will pay a premium to believe. The wine is the proof. The land and the name are the product. So, should you buy one? Here's the honest split. The optimistic version goes like this. You buy land inside a name that means something, or one the world is about to notice. You have money from elsewhere. So the years of losses don't frighten you. You build a beautiful place, you make wine good enough to be taken seriously, and you sell as much of it as you can directly through a tasting room and a club where you keep the whole margin. You add events and hospitality on top, and underneath all of it, the acreage you bought quietly appreciates. And the name on your label slowly gets more valuable every year you don't embarrass it. You end up with an asset that is beautiful, prestigious, and worth vastly more than you paid, that also happened to hand you a life among the vines. The harder version looks like this. You buy land somewhere, the name means nothing, because the good land was too expensive. You plant, you wait, you spend, and 5 years later you have a wine that is genuinely good, and no reason for anyone to pay a premium for it. So you sell wholesale at thin margins, because nobody is driving out to visit you. Then a frost takes a crop, and the hole shows up in your income 3 years later. Meanwhile, the fixed costs never blink. In that version, you are not building an empire. You are running a very expensive, very beautiful farm that slowly consumes the fortune you made doing something else. And the land does not save you, because the land was never scarce to begin with. The difference between those two futures has almost nothing to do with how good your wine is. That's the part people refuse to believe until they've lived it. You can make excellent wine and go broke, and you can make merely good wine in the right place and get rich. The bottle is the last thing that decides your fate, and the dirt is the first. Because in the end, a vineyard doesn't sell wine. It sells a place that cannot be copied, and a name nobody else is allowed to use. The bottle is just how the place introduces itself.